The Buddha was very specific when he says good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. And yet most meditation practices, like you said, where's my motivation? I got to have motivation because I don't have it good in the beginning. If I had it good in the beginning, that would be the motivation. And the reason that I'm teasing is because it's fun to do. And you seem to be enjoying it too, which is good.
Yes.
Okay, so we had gotten started in talking about the as an introduction. Buddhism is almost always seen as a philosophy. They call it that in the West to try to distinguish it from religion.
Yeah.
They don't do very good job with that because philosophy and religion have been hooked together at the hip like Siamese twins for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so even calling Buddhism philosophy is way too close to religion.
Yeah.
Okay. And some people would call it a psychotherapy, except that a psychotherapy, the situation is generally between a doctor and a client or a therapist and a client, to where the teachings of the Buddha is almost always done correctly as a relationship or a friendship between an old friend, a Kalyametta, and a new friend. And that part of the training process for the new friend is to bring him into friendship. So that he can be friendly. Because we live in a world of competition. There's a whole lot of competitiveness. Even in philosophy, there's a lot of competitiveness. That in fact, if there's anything, philosophy is a long history of writings of one philosopher trashing other philosophers. And you also have a whole lot of ignorance built into that too. My favorite of it all is Descartes, who says, "I think, therefore I am." Let's see if I can remember the Latin. Ergo sum.
Cognito ergo sum.
Cognito, exactly. Cognito ergo sum. But he didn't even speak Latin. He just made the Latin up out of the English or out of the. But I think, therefore I am, is exactly the mistake that most people make. A much better, let us say, piece of wisdom would be, I think, therefore I think I am.
Interesting.
Because that's what is really going on. The I am is just a thought, not a reality.
To be somewhat fair to Descartes, when he was saying I, he didn't mean an ego. He meant a
Well, he used the word ego.
I mean, yeah, and the quote, I don't think he actually.
Well, in fact, the word ego is very problematic also. One of the ways that we can actually begin to understand the proper teachings of the Buddha is to recognize that most of the problems is in language and in translation and in miscommunication. This is why people are unhappy in their lives, is because they don't live in reality and they go searching for reality and only find philosophy. They don't find the reality. And if they do find the reality, because they're not making the right choices, they generally hate the reality that they find and they would prefer to have their vision. And so people live in their visionary world. It's called a worldview.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And so basically in our society, we are taught to have critical thinking, that in fact philosophy is a great deal of philosophy is all about critical thinking, not just philosophers criticizing other philosophers, but criticizing everything. Philosophy is the art of using fancy words to say naughty things. But when we recognize that we suffer because we want things, that let me go ahead and say it like this. I'm beginning to go right into, without having much of the background, and so we'll go back in and pick up with the background later. There is a major teaching of the Buddha called Paticca Samuppada. In the Thai language, they say Paticca Samuppada. But this is the teaching of the Buddha that is in its most formal state, has 12 stages or 12 steps. And that basically the word Paticca Samuppada itself means everything is deep. When it arises, anything that does arise arises because it's dependent upon something else. And so this is translated in is dependently arising, that it depends upon things. There is a cause and effect, that the entire teaching of the Buddha is predicated upon cause and effect. But guess what? Even now in modern physics, both as astronomical physics and now down into particle physics, they're beginning to understand that there is something going on that's happening very, very fast, that is a constant cause effect, cause effect, cause effect, a kind of an underlying turmoil that's going on everywhere, that affects wind, it affects molecules, it affects interactions, and everything is in turmoil. This is what we mean by Paticca Samuppada, is that one thing happens to another, happens to another, happens to another, happens to another, happens to another. If what we're interested in is early in the sequence and we don't even see the sequence until late into it, then that means that we've missed something important, and all we wind up seeing is what we see in front of us, because that's when we woke up. If we had woken up sooner to see what was happening sooner, we would have seen the cause-effect relationships. So basically, the practice that we're developing has to do with how fast can you see what your own mind is doing. Now, if you're very, very slow at seeing what the mind is doing, we oftentimes wind up in difficult situations because we made a wrong turn and we didn't know we made a wrong turn until we wound up in an alley. And then we wonder, how did we get into the alley? Because we weren't watching what was happening in all of that sequence of events. But along that sequence of events, at one point in the Pali language, there is a word called pasa, which means contact. And basically what is contacting is not the outside world or the reality of the situation, it's what we've made of it, how we interpret it. And we interpret things based upon our past. That when we cognize things, we cognize it by recognizing it or remembering something from the past and putting that with what's happening now in order to make any understanding out of what's happening right now. An example is that you, in order to be able to turn a laptop on, you have to know what a laptop is. And that in fact, it even has an on button, rather than shaking it and hoping that it'll go on because you shake it. Or maybe you're supposed to dump it in water and that gets there, you know. All right. So we, in fact, that the knowledge of that on-off switch then comes out of the past. And so in order to make full use of that laptop, we have to know something about it from the past. That means that in this present moment, we're not seeing the laptop as brand new. We're seeing it as something that we're familiar with because of our past association with it. Once that event happens that now has the stuff added to it, that is what contacts us individually. In other words, the reality of the situation is not what contacts us, it's the realization of the reality that contacts us.
Our perception.
Our perceptions, right? And in fact, we can say, look at the word perception or preception. The word sept has the word of seeing in it. So perception means what happens before we see it. What does an artist do before he can see his painting? He has to actually paint. That's the perception. Perception is the painting of the drawing that we get in the mind of our image, and then the image is what we see. And that's what contacts us. And that contact then already may have some emotional past background built into it. An example of that is you see somebody walking down the street and they're in a uniform. And you see them in that uniform, and the uniform you've seen before, and you recognize it. And because you recognize that uniform, how you respond to that person depends upon the uniform recognition that you had based upon your past knowledge of uniforms. So that uniform may be a brown shirt out of the 1930s. That uniform may be a nun's habit. That uniform may be a Buddhist monk's robe. It may be a hospital gown of some patient in the hospital. It may be, in fact, the uniform of the nurse. Now, if one of these things that I'm talked about will evict a kind of small different emotion or a different feeling based upon which uniform I have mentioned. In fact, I can also mention others like general uniforms, high-ranking military officers. How about an SS officer or the Gestapo and their black uniforms? Okay, see, you have a different feeling with that one.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this is what we're getting at is that what we perceive or what we make of things is then what contacts us, and how we make of things already has built into it a direction of how we're going to feel. That gives rise to feelings. And these feelings are often subconscious. We don't even know that we're having them because we're not paying attention. If we pay close attention to them, then we can see them easily. It's like if you are standing in the room and there is an ant on the floor, and you look down at the floor, you can see the ant, but if you don't look down at the floor, you're not going to see the ant. If you look at something, then you can look at the floor and you can see what the floor is doing. But if that ant is not moving, the likelihood is even if you look at the floor, you're not going to see the ant. But if the ant is crawling, if it's moving across the floor and that motion catches the eye, then you can see the ant. This is the concept of what the Buddha is all about with anicca. Everything is in turmoil. Everything is in motion. All you have to do is to wake up and see what's moving.
I see.
Okay, everything is in constant flux, and we almost always get surprised in the sense that something happens, anicca, and because it catches us off guard, we wind up becoming selfish about it. And with selfishness comes frustrations. But if we are wise at that point in contact, then when that anicca happens and we make sense out of it, then our feelings will be wise feelings in the sense that we know how we feel. If we are feeling ignorantly, that means that I like it. The feeling of I like it, basically there's three kinds. I like it, I don't like it, and I'm not sure whether I like it or not. I'm confused. I'm confused. Confusion, along with the fear of the unknown, will bring up fear. I don't like it will bring up annoyance, and I like it brings up desire. Okay, if I like it, then the next ignorant step that happens is I like it, I want it. If we continue along that, I like it, I want it, therefore I've got to have it. That's the clinging stage, and that's the stage where the I, the atta, comes into it, because the ownership requires an owner as well as an object to be owned. The whole quality of ownership means that there's an owner.
Mhm.
Okay, and so this is where the ownership creates the self, the owner, and that is then what is subject to the suffering. All due to the fact that our feelings are ignorant. So if I don't like something, then I'm trying to get rid of it, and I'm clinging to getting rid of it. And so I own that object. In fact, that's exactly what you hear in politics all the time. The Republicans are trying to own the libs. You probably heard that, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here. That is the creation of the misery of the Republican Party, is because they think I own the libs, where in fact there is no such thing as libs. There's nothing to it.
Mhm.
Not one person that I know of will say, yeah, when the Republican's talking about owning the libs, he's talking about owning me. Nobody says
I see.
So this is the sequence of events that happens, but if we act wisely
Mhm.
at that point in contact, then we can say wisely, I like that, but I don't want it.
I see.
If we have the situation, I don't like that,
Mhm.
but I can handle that, I'm okay.
Mhm.
Most people, when they get into wanting things, the reason that they want it is because they like it, and then they ignorantly assume that if I like it and I want it, that
Mhm.
means that it should be good.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if I don't like it and don't want it, that means that it must be bad.
Mhm.
Not only that, but if I like it and I want it and it must be good, then another mistake we can make is then I need it. In other
Mhm.
words, because I want it, I'm not whole until I
Mhm.
get it. That's the hunger that brings happiness. When we get what we want, now we're fulfilled, because we were in a state of wanting something. We got what we wanted, and now we're filled. That's not nearly as good a state as just not wanting anything in the first place.
Mhm.
That in fact, it's quite busy, from liking it to wanting it to gotta have it to go actually going and getting it, to be frustrated with getting it. When you finally get it, now that you've got it, you got to protect it. It might be flimsy, it might be dangerous, and then when you do lose it, you're going to feel bad. But while you've got it, you can feel good, so long as you're in the mentality that I need this. Many times people will go shopping, they see something, they say, oh, I need that. They buy it, they bring it home, they don't even unpack the box.
Yeah.
How many things has that happened? How many things has been delivered by Amazon and remained left unopened?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at, is that the fact is that wanting changes on a regular basis. And so many people will go from I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that, and they're constantly in a state of being starved. And they don't get fulfilled.
Mhm.
And the reason that they want things is because they have unwholesome thoughts, ignorant thoughts, thoughts that I would be better off with that stuff. And so, what the real practice of the Buddha is, the real practice of Anapanasati, is getting ourselves into a state of satisfaction so that we don't want anything.
Mhm.
And then we're good. Everything is fine. I don't need anything. Good to
Mhm.
go. Po lao, which is Thai language for enough already. I've had enough. I've had about as much joy as I can stand.
So, can you go even further down the chain? I'm just curious.
Actually, no, what we're when you say further down the chain, I assume you mean in time order. If you're talking about going back up the chain, that means that you're going earlier in order. Is that what you mean? Going earlier in the sequence?
Earlier to ignorance.
Well, ignorance is there all along when we are children. When a human being is born as a child, is completely ignorant. It doesn't have any of the social skills, and that in fact, many of the metabolic and physiological things are not even determined. That the scientists have figured out that DNA is not set prenatally early, that in fact, prenatally, the DNA keeps changing even after birth. That it has that whether a person is heterosexual or of another orientation does have both nature and nurture elements, but the nurturing actually changes the nature.
The DNA, yeah.
Right, because the DNA has blockers and receptors and things that flip on and off after a child is born. Many pieces of evidence like that, including the studies of schizophrenia and many other things. But the point that I'm making is that when we are born, we're born ignorant, and we're still in development. A lot of the things that we pick up as kids, we picked them up when we were ignorant. Some of the decisions that you made as a child, you continue to make those same decisions ignorantly because you're not recognizing they're making them. But if you had decided as an adult with adult ideas and with adult understanding, or rather than having the ignorance of a child, you have the ignorance of an adult, then some of the things that you did as a child, you wouldn't have done. And that some of the things that we do as children that are ignorantly, we continue to repeat those over and over and over again, especially if we get reinforcement for doing it. Everything is reinforced over and over again. For instance, if a mom is yelling at a child over and over and over again, day after day, month after month, year after year, then that child will yell himself when mom is not there. This is, in fact, what it's all about, is that we continue yelling at ourselves the way that we were yelled at when we were kids. And as an adult, if somebody yelled at you that way, you just walk off. But as children, we don't have any choice. We pull that stuff in ignorantly. So ignorance is the base of everything. And then ignorance is also mixed in with all of our memories so that we don't remember things correctly. We only remember bits and pieces and scratches and whatnot like that. We could go so far as to say that it is an inferior mechanism all in every process, all along the way, in every step. When you see something, you don't see everything, you only see something. So automatically, when we see something from the very beginning, the input is not complete, is partial. Once we see something, we make sense of it based upon our own past. Therefore, we've modified it once we see it. Then we might modify it. Then we store it away into an imperfect memory system that then has other memories mixed on top of it. And so things get mixed together in there like a soup rather than in distinct layers. It's not lasagna at all. It's a stew. Okay, and because of that, then when we pull that information out, we also pull it out ignorantly. So we saw it ignorantly. We made sense out of it ignorantly. We stored it ignorantly. It kept ignorantly, and then when we pulled it back out, it came out ignorantly. There's always lack of data, missing pieces. And that's how we live our lives, based upon partial information. And that partial information basically was that we didn't know how to act correctly in a situation, so we acted inappropriately, and now we continue to act inappropriately in similar situations through our whole life. Like, for instance, somebody dies and we feel bad. Hey, if somebody dies, that means there's just no more space on planet Earth. Why isn't everybody happy when somebody dies? Why do we have to be unhappy? Right? We're unhappy because we saw mommy unhappy when somebody died when we were a baby. And so mom's unhappiness teaches us how to be unhappy when something happens. And so we continue to live our lives ignorantly. So what anapanasati is the practice of waking up to the thoughts that we have that were ignorantly stored, ignorantly based, and are generally unwholesome. And we need then to start having the thoughts that are wholesome. And the best kind of way for the beginner to understand what is a wholesome thought would be what's happening right now. If it's in the past, it's probably not wholesome. If it's in the future, it's probably not wholesome. If it's a thought that we're having about what's happening right now, like, oh, what a nice big deep breath this is. Oh, and it feels so good to sigh. Now that's a wholesome thought.
You said probably in the future and probably in the past. So can you have wholesome future thoughts or wholesome past thoughts?
Yes, if you like what you're planning on doing. An example of that, well, a hot diggity dog, we'll get that done. But
And
we
that
don't normally think about the future like that. We think about the future in the sense of, oh no, I've got to do this.
So wouldn't a better metric be to kick out the thoughts that don't make you happy and keep the thoughts that do?
That's a good start. That's an excellent start. One of the ways of talking about it is that going to the teachings of the Buddha, the Eightfold Noble Path, we're talking now about right view. The right view is that some things are wholesome and some things are not wholesome, and that it's worthy of an investigation. It's worthy of investigation to see if it's worthy of having this thought or not. Now, when do we do this? When do we do this evaluation? We do it when we remember to do it. This is what's called sati, the wake up. Wake up enough that we're no longer operating in a semi-conscious fashion. We wake up enough to where we're fully awake so that we could really see what's going on. This is sati. And to see what's going on is the investigation. You probably heard the expression, wake up and smell the coffee.
Yeah.
The waking up we're talking about, the smelling of the coffee means that now we're going into sensory awareness. We smell, or we touch, or we see, or we hear, but we come out of the internal mechanism of thought and we come to the here now. And the here now is best experienced with the senses that are being turned on and receiving data in the here now. It's almost like what's happening is people, in the old days they had AM radio. I think that in fact cars sometimes still have AM and FM radios. Okay. Now, if that radio is turned on, it's receiving the signals from many different stations, but you can tune those out so that you can go to a particular frequency and then you get the input that's happening from that radio station right now. Right? If you turn that radio off, then it is not listening to what's happening right now on the airwaves. But if the person who turned the radio off continues to sing the song that they were singing, now they're in their head. They're not listening to the radio anymore. They're listening to their own head, right? This is the distinction we're trying to make, is the distinction between reality and mental construction. To come out of the mentally constructing worlds that we live in and come into the world of reality, into the world of the senses. And we're not trying to stop the mind. In fact, nobody can really do that. Let me give you this example. Here's the mind, and it's all over the place. It's constructing, it's building, it's thinking, all kinds of stuff. And we're saying, okay, well, meditation is to stop the mind. And so we take it from this state into. Nobody can do that. But what we can do instead is when the mind is all over the place like that, we can set boundaries and say, okay, within this boundary, you play. And then we narrow the boundaries down to this and say, okay, in this boundary, you can play. Then we set the boundaries down like this and say, okay, in this boundary, you can play. And then we come down to the point, okay, in this boundary, you can play. And now in this boundary, you can play. Okay. This is the way of looking at it, is to be able to control the mind. We got to get it out of all of this really big stuff, unwholesome, and bring it into a smaller place that's wholesome.
And this wholesomeness, again, is wholesomeness a binary again?
I don't know.
Okay, interesting.
Everything is on a continuum, but again, this has to do with choice. That it's not necessarily that it is binary, it's that the human mind wants to make the boundary or draw the boundaries. You're wanting to put the boundaries in there for the good or the bad, or the good or the up or the down, and making it binary.
But aren't we?
So the question is not about whether it's binary or not. The question is, where do you draw the line between what is binary? Which, okay, if you draw the line right here, then everything over here is yes and everything over here is no. But if we move the line up here, then everything over here is yes and all of this stuff is no. And then when you put it really wholesomely, then the wholesome is really, really tiny, and all the unwholesome stuff is huge.
So, like, at some point, your line will be near the unwholesome.
As you develop in skill, the beginning student will see almost everything is okay until they begin to recognize, wait a minute, that thought is not wholesome. And so we begin to move the line a little bit. And then we see, okay, that thought's not wholesome, so let's move the line a little bit. And so the skill that's developing, or one's right view, is that discrimination to see what is really wholesome for you and what is not wholesome for you. And so the binary choice that you're going to make then is, I'm going to put up with this happily, or I'm going to throw this crap out because I don't need it.
Okay. And then is this an infinite slider, or is there a point where you're done?
You are such a philosopher. I don't even know or care.
Okay.
I'm trying to give you an idea that there's a sliding scale, and the individual, depending upon his skill, determines where that slide bar rests.
But for example, you're not done either with this process.
I'm sorry, what?
You're not done with this process either, then, is what I'm assuming. Or have you finished this?
Well, I'm not dead.
So you have to die to finish the process?
Well, when you're dead, there's not much processing going on. It's more of a decomposition.
Okay. I understand.
Which brings an old joke. Right. You know that very many famous people are buried in Vienna. They've got some very famous cemeteries there. And there's one famous one that people go to on a regular basis because there's some sort of strange sound coming from that. In fact, it's Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven. Right. And that very strange faint sound that keeps coming from the place is da, 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 da. And people got really confused. And so they recognized that, wait a minute, this is actually Beethoven's Fifth Symphony decomposing. Da, 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 da. So it's da, 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 da. He's decomposing. Right. So that's what we do when we're dead. We decompose. When we're alive, we continue to pose right along. The question is, are you going to pose happily or unhappily?
I see.
Everything is process.
I have a morbid question then, if that's okay.
A morbid question. Okay.
If if death is supposedly the end, why not die?
Okay.
I mean,
I'll leave that to you to answer. What
okay.
is it that's keeping you alive?
Okay, so this is like
Because a lot of people will get themselves into a state to say that this is not worth keeping.
This life is not worth keeping.
The suicide rate in Japan is very high.
Mm-hmm.
Also, while I'm going to talk about schizophrenia for just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
While many people in the culture are afraid of schizophrenics because they're afraid of their violence, normally there's only one place that a schizophrenic would become violent, and that is to harm himself. That the suicide rate for schizophrenics are very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
Because they do not see any way out of their misery. This is what happens when people are in depression, is they don't see any way out of their misery.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot see any way out of your misery, then why not die? I mean, what if you got a choice? You can end it now and be finished with it all, or you can just spend more time in misery. That's your choice.
Mm-hmm.
If that were my choice, I would choose suicide.
Mm-hmm. Same.
If all I had to choose was misery. But there's almost always a third choice. And that is to come out of the misery unscathed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially since we begin to realize that all the misery that we've ever had anyway was self-generated. All dukkha is created within one's own mind. This is, in fact, the entire teaching of the second noble truth.
Mm-hmm.
Where the first noble truth says there is suffering, many people in the West immediately make the mistake of saying life is suffering. Life is not suffering.
Yeah.
Life itself is not suffering. A lot of people really enjoy life.
Mm-hmm.
But a whole lot of people don't. And when they don't enjoy their life, they think it's the life's fault, and I'd be better off dead.
So
that's just more ignorance.
So death is not wholesome, it's just the absence of unwholesomeness. Is that the...
Well, let us put it this way. Death is just death. That's all it is. Death is just death. Now, let's look at it from two different perspectives. One is you and I are sitting here, and both of us look down at the floor, and there's a dead body there laying on the floor. It's dead. Mm-hmm. Now we have to deal with our feelings, my personal feelings, and your personal feelings about the fact you've got a corpse at your feet. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We're talking about death is you're dead. Mm-hmm. And when you're dead, then there's no suffering.
But there's no happiness either.
There's no happiness, there's nothing.
Yeah. All right. What I'm trying to...
But there's nothing much there anyway. So we haven't, even if we're dead, we haven't lost anything, because all we've got is nothing now, but that's all we ever had was nothing. Except that now we're free from all the bad feelings that we had about all that nothing. And when you're dead, you don't even have the feelings. There's really a bigger nothing.
So which nothingness is more preferable, I suppose?
I will leave that for you to figure out for yourself.
Like people, you know, Mahasamadhi, right? Like, is that...
You're talking about an individual named Mahasamadhi, or are you talking about
a term,
a concept?
There's a term where supposedly when you get enlightened, there will become a time when you get enlightened. There will become a time when you want to die, and then you just kill yourself consciously, not by like taking a gun, but by willing yourself to death.
Whoever said that obviously does not know what he's talking about. But he's probably repeating the story the way that he heard it from someone who did know what they were talking about. And he's just become confused.
I'm confused.
Well, there's a lot of confusion in there, isn't it? That's one of the three primary feelings. The question is what are we going to do with our confusion?
Mm-hmm.
All right. One of the things that we can do with confusion is that we can see that it's the unknown, it's confusing, and because it's unknown and we don't know what to do with it, it might be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're confused, we become afraid and fearful.
Mm-hmm.
So people become afraid of death because they're confused about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That in fact, that corpse is laying it on the floor. I don't know what you're going to do with your corpse, but I'm just going to step over mine because it really is nothing there anyway. It was all in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the idea then of confusion does not necessarily have to lead to fear
Mm-hmm.
or doubt or worry or
Mm-hmm.
restlessness or feeling like we've got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, we can change that with mindfulness and with right effort. We can change it from confusion into curiosity.
Okay.
Because curiosity is quite healthy. It's wholesome. Yeah, let's go check that stuff out. Let's go see what that is. That could be fun. So we could either approach it with curiosity, wow, let's go check that out. Or we can do it with confusion. What the hell is this?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to deal with that? Gosh, I don't know what to do with it. It must be dangerous. Let's kill it. Always it's our choice of how we're going to deal with the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to deal with our feelings wisely? Or are we going to deal with our feelings ignorantly? And also in the same way, on a moment by moment, instantaneous basis, we recognize that the reason people feel the way that they do is because of the thoughts that they're having, that thoughts and feelings interact, that feelings will change the way you think, and thinking will change the way you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there's bodily components in there, in the sense that the way you think will change the way you feel, and that will affect the way your body is. You can also see the way the body is. For instance, physical illness will then, because you're physically ill, you feel bad. And because you feel bad, you can't think straight.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, for Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and others, we look at being physically ill as a opportunity to practice in the sense of, yeah, the body is sick. And yeah, I feel like shit. But that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
My mind is up and sharp and I can handle that sickness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can bring on a positive attitude, even though the body, but most people, when the body gets sick, they get miserable.
Mm-hmm.
They can't keep their mind in great shape. Okay. So when someone let us say, when someone progresses along the path, more and more and more unwholesome things melt away and they stay in really, really wholesome states, which means we begin to change our attitudes about death, because death is normally a fearful thing. But if we don't see death as fearful anymore,
Mm-hmm.
then we begin to deal with our instinctual nature at a different level, so that we do not allow the self-preservation instinct to have so many false positives. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That in fact death is not fearful. We were just taught that it was fearful. For every time that death comes up, we have fearful thoughts. We can make that disconnection and say, just because death is there doesn't mean that I have to have the feelings that are associated with the way that I used to feel about death. I can feel a way about it any way that I want to. The death itself, again, like we were talking before, is empty.
Mm-hmm.
Death itself does not have grief. Death itself does not have misery and feelings of loss and suffering. Not there. All of that stuff is added by the people around the dead corpse.
Mhm.
And they do it inside their own mind. This is, again, the second noble truth. There is a cause for all suffering. Or when we use, actually, the word is dukkha. And the word dukkha is best described as unsatisfying or unsatisfactory. And certainly suffering is unsatisfactory. But there are also things that are unsatisfying and unsatisfactory that we would not call suffering.
Mhm.
That in fact, if you got a let us say like a Jehovah's Witness, only it's Buddhist, and you got a Buddhist book or a Buddhist track, and you went around knocking on door to door and say, "Here, take my track, read this,"
Mhm.
because it will solve your suffering. People will say, "I'm not suffering. Goodbye."
Yeah.
But if you talk about it in the sense of, well, what about dissatisfactions? Are you always satisfied, or are there dissatisfactions? And now we're beginning to understand what dukkha really is. It's the fact that we're not suffering,
Mhm.
but we are uncomfortable. It's almost like that. It's like a stone in the shoe, not a nail coming through.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, that if the nail comes through, that's really suffering. But just the stone in the shoe is not suffering, but we're still going to sit down and take the shoe off, take the stone out.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what dukkha is. And dukkha is not life itself. Dukkha is what is added to life ignorantly.
Mhm.
And that it's got a particular cause. And that cause is basically wanting things we don't have, or putting up with things that are difficult to put up with, and ignorance, in the sense that we don't even know what it is or how to feel about it.
Mhm.
And if we begin to wake up and become wise to the way that we feel, then we can begin to change the way that we feel. If we don't even know how we feel, then we have no control over what the feelings are.
Mhm.
But if we are wise to the feelings, then we automatically, because we have knowledge of them, we begin to put things together. Now, the important point that I think that we mentioned in the early is that this Buddha's meditation is not a passive meditation. It's quite active.
Mhm.
It's an active practice. This is the point where we're talking about that it's got to be active, is that when you recognize that this thought is unwholesome, you have to throw it out of the mind and put wholesome thoughts in. This is one's right effort. We have to take the effort. We have to put the skin in the game. This is not a passive meditation at all. You have to wake up, take a look, figure out, is this thought that I'm having worthwhile having right now or not? And if it's not, we change it, and we do what is called in the Anapanasati Sutta, gladdening the mind, or
Mhm.
we can think of it as brightening the mind, or we can think of it even as smiling the mind.
Okay.
Put a big grin on the mind,
Mhm.
okay, to brighten it up, to smile, to gladden the mind, lighten it up, okay. Unwholesome thoughts are heavy thoughts. We're going to make things very lightweight. As you notice in this whole conversation that we've had, it's just been just one joke, one light point after another. Nothing heavy here at all.
Mhm.
We're not going to do philosophy. Philosophy is really heavy. They even give PhDs in it. It's funny also, some of those same universities give PhDs in Buddhist studies.
Mhm.
Very heavy duty Buddhist studies. I don't study Buddhism. That's a lot of work. I'm enjoying myself far too much to work at studying anything. So this is the difference in the whole frame of reference change out of the ordinary mindset where you find religions and philosophies and jobs to do and work to do. Um, and we're going to put it into the place where there is no work to do, because all the work that needed to be done has just been finished. And what was the work that I needed to do? Close the workbook. That was the work that needed to be done, was to close the workbook. Once the workbook is closed, there's no more work to be done. And that's the only job that we need to do. And yet most people say, oh, no, I've got to keep my workbook open and I've got to read down through. I got to do this. I got to do that. Turn to pay. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do this. I got to do that. And they give themselves a great big long list of things to do. But the right way to look at it is, I don't have any work to do. I've closed the book. And that was the job that I needed to do right now in this present moment. Close that book. And now I don't have anything to do and I can relish it. And in fact, this is the same as the Zen haiku of no place to go, nothing to do. And the spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Now, in fact, the most important line in that whole little haiku poem is the grass grows by itself. It does not need my help. Grass growing is not my business. The world and all of its grass growing is not my problem. That I can leave the world alone. I can just enjoy my friends and just sit here and have a ball in my life. Not harming anyone. But philosophers, they're out there doing this to each other.
Not all philosophers, but okay.
Just the ones I know. So, Anapanasati practice is based upon the Eightfold Noble Path. The Eightfold Noble Path is the method of coming out of the dukkha that we create for ourselves. And so then the third noble truth is going to be the recognition that right now I'm not suffering. We can check that out. Am I, right now I've got no problems, I've got no worries, everything is okay. Take a deep breath and just sigh and relax, and everything is good to go, not a worry in the world. And if I do come up with a worry, I throw that out and come back into my state of no worries. This is the only job to be done. And when that job is done, then we're finished. And we can rest on our laurels. The job is well done. Once we have that feeling of the job is well done, that gives us the fourth element on the Eightfold Noble Path. The first one is right view, to investigate. The second one is right sati, to remember to investigate. This one winds up being so important. The third one is the right effort that it takes to throw out unwholesome thoughts and to replace them with wholesome thoughts, as well as taking a deep breath, that we're going to have the wholesome thought as a breath. An unwholesome breath would be a very shallow breath, the kind of breath that we're not talking about, thinking about, or they just kind of happen while we're asleep, literally. If you didn't breathe when you were asleep, you'd die.
Yeah.
So if by taking right effort, that means that we're going to start breathing well, energize the body, throw out the carbon dioxide that's built up into the blood, do a bit of exchange here, and rid the body of the unwholesome carbon dioxide and take on the wholesome, fresh new air. And do that enough to where the body becomes tingly alive. A lot of people think that meditation is something that they go down into. They call it deep. I was deep into meditation. Oh, well, that's your excuse for not watching what was going on. Yeah, the house was burning down and you're sitting there deep in meditation. I know. I've been there. I've done that.
Your house is literally burning down, or just a metaphor?
Well, in fact, I got kicked out of the house because the landlord was there wanting to talk to me, and I would rather prove to him that I can sit and meditate and not paying attention to him. That board it out. Yes, I did. It burned my house down. And the Buddha said that was happening to him too at one time when he was really, really young in the meditation, and the lightning struck very closely and it killed 4 cows.
Whoa.
And he woke up out of his meditation. There's these dead poor cows right in front of him. And he wasn't even aware of it. All right. This is not a deep meditation. This is a brightening meditation. This is to come up, to see what's going on, to literally wake up. This is what the word Buddha really means. It doesn't mean going deep into meditation. It means coming out of our meditation state, in the sense of mulling things over and thinking about things and whatnot like that, and pay attention to what's going on in the here now, to literally wake up and be here in the present moment. This is the name of the Buddha. He gave himself the name Tathagata. He did not call himself Buddha. That didn't come until about 300 BC.
When was the Buddha alive?
He called himself Tathagata.
Mm-hmm.
And the word Tathagata comes from the word tatata plus go, in the sense of tatata means thusness or thisness or in this present moment or be here now or here now in this present moment. And the rest of the word has to do with one who goes to the here now, or the one who is in the here now. And so that's why it was wrongly translated is gone to thusness, is how it was translated by the first guys. Gone to thusness. Well, thus means this. It's just an old-fashioned word.
Mm-hmm.
Gone to this.
Mm-hmm.
This here. This is what we're talking about. This here now in the present moment that can be sensed with the eyes, the ears, the touch, the taste, the tongue, but it's not sensed with the revolving mind.
Yeah.
We have to get out of that into sensory awareness, but we're not going to get out of it completely. Like I said, we can't stop the mind. We have to bring it down. And so we're going to start monitoring it so that it only has wholesome thoughts. Once we can do this, once we recognize, yes, I can change my mind, yes, I can do this, then that begins to build the fourth item on the Eightfold Noble Path. Sama Sankappa is the Pali word, and it means basically the right attitude, the attitude of a winner, the attitude of I can do this, the attitude I'm on top of this thing, the attitude of not being a victim. You see, when we were born and raised as children, we started off naturally in the position of being a victim, that we needed to be taken care of or we would die. We were not capable of handling it on our own. We were too ignorant to handle even staying alive.
Mm-hmm.
But as an adult, you're capable of keeping yourself alive, but you're still hanging on to the old ignorance of the time when we couldn't. What that hanging on to then is what I will call now the loser's mentality or the victim.
Mm-hmm.
The victim uses words like meditation is hard.
Mm-hmm.
They use words like monkey mind. They use words like there it goes again.
Mm-hmm.
They use words like can you help me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, always in the victim's position of wanting someone else to do the job for me because my mommy did my job for me when I was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I am now looking for those authorities to help me fix my life because I don't know how to do that. I'm still a victim.
Mm-hmm.
That is an unwholesome thought. Because the reality is that you're only a victim because you think you're a victim. And if you think that you're a champion, then you will be a champion. It's a matter of attitude. And we have to actually change our attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And the attitude is, I can do this. The attitude of, I can clean out my mind. The attitude of, I can be happy. The attitude of, I feel safe. The attitude, I feel secure, not dangerous, not confused, not worried, but safe, secure. I have the feeling of being satisfied and content, don't want anything. Someone comes and says, are you hungry? The answer is no. Would you like a cup of coffee? No, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's okay just the way that it is. I can, as long as I got a breath to take, I'm good. I don't need anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't breathe well, then I'll start worrying about all the other things I might think I might need.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm breathing well and sitting here, I can be completely satisfied. That's the practice of anapanasati, is getting oneself into a state of satisfaction, getting oneself into the state of the attitude of, I can do this, that, wow, this works. Wow, I can do this. Wow, I just finished the job that needed to be done. What was that job? Removing unwholesome thoughts of, I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I close that workbook of all the work that I need to do. I've just done all the work I needed to do, and I'm happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the practice of anapanasati, and this goes against the grain of our entire civilization. Our entire civilization says you got to work to eat.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to call you lazy.
Yeah.
My job is to make you work so I will benefit.
Yeah.
And we all have that attitude. That's the disease of the entire society. And guess what? It doesn't matter how much money you have or how much power you have. That whole thing is still there, in the sense of, if I want more money, I've got to go rob you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so it's always getting it from someplace else, rather than recognizing we've got everything we need already.
Mm-hmm.
You've already got everything you need. You're already enlightened. Why should you want anything?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the practice. Right view, right sati, waking up, right effort, and right attitude. Those things together, when they are skills to be practiced, when you practice them, you're developing a new skill, and that new skill will then be called unification of mind, where the mind is now fit for work. It's a whole mind. It is unified. It's not having an internal conflict or argument.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now the meditator, the guy who's doing a meditation class or whatever like that, he's sitting and watching on YouTube. And then the thought comes, you ought to meditate. And he says, I don't want to meditate right now. I want to watch the YouTube. Now he's not watching YouTube, and now he's not meditating. Now he's in this internal dialogue of conflict. You should meditate. No, I don't want to meditate. You should meditate. No, I don't want to meditate. This is a disorganized, non-unified mind. If he was watching the video and he had the thought, you should meditate, the answer to that then would naturally be, yeah, you're right. Yeah, feels really good. That's unified.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That we do it right then and there. That's what makes it unified, rather than resisting it. And so we stop with the internal resistance to doing the things that we should do, turn that whole dialogue off, and just enjoy the moment. That's the way that we practice. And by doing that and getting skilled at it means that now you can put yourself into a really happy, pleasant state anytime that you want to, because it happens really quickly. All you have to do is remember, and there you go, back into that really nice state.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but you also begin to develop the skill of having that linger, so that it's not very short, but it begins to stretch out and linger, so that more mind moments, more time is spent happily, and you can get yourself into that state of happiness more often, quicker, easier. This is the one's right practice. These are the skills to be developed, the skills of getting into a really happy state, and the skill of maintaining that requires other skills. The skills of remembering to look to see, are you in a happy state or not? To take the effort to throw the unhappiness out and to put happiness in, to take a deep breath. Now, in doing this, I've actually begun to mention all of the various aspects of Anapanasati. There's actually 16 stages of Anapanasati, but we've already touched on several of them.
Mm-hmm.
Waking up, the sati, step 9. Investigating the mind is step 9. Gladdening the mind is step 10. Feeling safe and secure and comfortable, that's sukha, step number 6. The winner's attitude is step 5. Feeling comfortable and relaxed, step 4. So all of these various things that we're talking about, each one of those are skills to be developed while we're breathing in and breathing out in a very deep, happy way. And when we get ourselves into a really, really good state, now we can really begin to investigate. But we'll use that as another topic for our talks. Right now, we're just getting out of the whole system of philosophy into right this very moment. Can you change that thought from an unwholesome thought to a happy, wholesome thought? That's the only job that you have. That's one's right effort. That and taking a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we want to do is we want to get away from it all, go off into seclusion, and begin to purify the mind by removing the unwholesome thoughts and allowing only wholesome thoughts in. And that's how we start the process. Most meditations, they miss that step and they start immediately into noting. When they do that, that means that now they're noting a whole bunch of crap, but they're not doing anything about it. Here, as soon as we note that stuff, out it goes. And when we get rid of all of the unwholesome crap and we've got only wholesome things to note, now the real work begins. Actually, it's not the real work. Now the play begins. Now the game is afoot. Now we can get something done where before all we were doing was noting the crap, which leads to fear, misery, disgust, delusion, strong desire of wanting to be escaping. And those 5 items, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then number 11, the redetermination. This is all stuff out of the 16 stages of insight. What I recommend is don't do that.
No.
Why do people do that? Is because they're mindfully noticing crap. And then when they notice it well enough, it becomes miserable. Our job is to not notice it until things become really miserable. Our job is to recognize.
You froze again.
Okay. Yeah. If the internet goes down like that, just wait. It generally comes back. If you turn it off, that will stop the video. So now that we have talked about it, we've actually covered the entire Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths. So this is a fairly good introduction as to how we're practicing. This is very, very practically oriented. This is not philosophy at all. No reason to even think about emptiness because we can turn that into a philosophy. We're really working on it in the sense of reality. The reality is that unwholesome thoughts lead people to believe that there is substance there when in fact there is no substance there. The reality is it's empty. That, for instance, a laptop is just a laptop. It's empty of everything else. Right? One of the things it is actually empty of is my feelings. This laptop does not have my feelings. It's empty. It does not know how I feel, nor does it care. That I add that to it. Okay, and so this is the concept of emptiness or sunyata, is to be careful what you're putting in there. Because if you're not putting anything in there, then it's just going to be left empty. An example of that is the forest is empty of a village. There's no village in the forest. If you go into the forest and you find a village, now you're in a village. You're not in the forest. The village is empty of a forest. Okay. That the sala, at lunchtime, the monks are in the sala. But when it's not lunchtime, then the sala is empty. It's got no monks in it. This is exactly how we want to look at sunyata. Is not that that nothing is there. It's just what is there is empty of attitudes, views, opinions, feelings. Those are all in the human mind. An example of that is the concept of drain the swamp. Right? Guess what? There's no swamp. Or if it is a swamp, the swamp is empty. The reality is that if there's any swamp there, the swamp is in the mind of the person who wants to drain the swamp. That's where the swamp is. But the swamp itself, no swamp there. It's empty. When you recognize that, then we can put down sunyata and say, okay, we've got that one. It's no longer a philosophy. It's just a way of looking at things correctly. When we're looking at things correctly, they're empty. That's just all there is to it. Nothing philosophical about it at all.
Okay.
And so this will begin to change your perception of things. Why? Because you're adding new information in. Remember, we talked about the past. Well, what's happening in this video right now is going to be tomorrow's yesterday. And you're going to reflect upon what we've talked about and gain benefit and remember that stuff so that you can remember, oh yeah, I could take a deep breath and just relax. No place to go, nothing to do. All the work that needed to be done was done when I closed that workbook. And you have a great big book called Philosophy. And right now it's time to close that book and just sit here and just enjoy yourself. So, do you have any questions about this?
So you said, I guess this is going a little bit ahead, but is one of your practices to notice the breath at all times?
I don't ever use the word at all times.
As much as you can.
When you remember it is the right way to say it.
Okay.
And skill to remember is a skill to be developed.
So even
but
now,
if you tell yourself all the time, then you're setting yourself up for failure. That's a should. You should be doing that. All right. But that's an unwholesome thought. So all the time it's got an unwholesome quality built into it. This is something that you will begin to develop through your own understanding, is what is wholesome and what is not wholesome. Words like all the time are unwholesome. Words like hard or try, those are unwholesome thoughts. Wholesome thoughts are piece of cake, got this wired, no problem here. Everything's going to be all right. Everything's fine. These are wholesome thoughts. So this is what we have to start doing. Gladdening the mind, perk it up.
So
Don't worry. Go ahead.
So even right now, I should be trying. No, right now I should be remembering the breath.
Remembering, that's the number one skill that needs to be practiced. Practice it over and over again. And so the Buddha's got a technique for that. It's called the breath. Mindfully you breathe in long, and mindfully you breathe out long, which means sati on the in-breath, sati on the out-breath. If you keep practicing sati on the in-breath, sati on the out-breath, sati on the in-breath, sati on the out-breath, keep practicing that, and you're developing the skill of sati to remember to be here now. And because why? Because if we don't remember to be here now, we'll get lost in our own mind. We'll get lost in space. We'll get lost in thought. But if we remember to come back to this breath, to this present moment, and be in the present with wholesome thoughts. That's why we develop sati. Eventually, perhaps, let us say it this way, perhaps there'll come a time when you can do it all the time, or perhaps it will come a point in time when you're doing it often enough that the times when you're not doing it don't matter. But it's still not all the time, but doesn't matter. It's empty. Doing it all the time is empty. And so we recognize that that's unwholesome to think about doing it all the time. No, what we want to do is practice building the skill of remembering it right now. This moment, not all day long, just this moment. You'll have more of them later. And when they come, you can say, this moment, sati. So this is how we practice, always with the focus of what's happening right here, right now. This is anapanasati. Mm-hmm. Keep watching, keep paying attention. You don't have to go to anything particular about nose tips or whatever. Just breathe. Knowing that it's a long, deep in-breath. Notice that the chest moves. Notice that the diaphragm moves. Notice that whatever is happening, everything is in flux, everything is in motion. And you breathe in, nice and long and deep. You breathe out, sati. Remember to breathe out a long, deep in-breath. And we keep practicing this. And the skills develop. And you get immediate benefit. Mm-hmm. This is the point about the Buddha that a lot of people misunderstand. The Buddha was very specific when he says good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. And yet most meditation practices, like you said, where's my motivation? I got to have motivation because I don't have it good in the beginning. If I had it good in the beginning, that would be the motivation. Mm-hmm. Okay, so good in the beginning means immediately you start having more wholesome thoughts and you begin to enjoy it and you begin to gladden the mind and begin to feel really good immediately. Right from the very beginning, it feels good. In the middle, no need for a dark night of the soul. Mm-hmm. We've already removed all the unwholesome, so when we get to the middle, there's no unwholesome to pull us down. And so we go from wholesome.
There you
go. Okay, so we're back again. Yes, I know it's frozen. When it freezes for you, it freezes for me. Not a problem. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's finish off now. I think that we've gotten everything that we need to get you started. So you go practice that. When are you going to call back?
Anytime really works for me, so it's your choice.
I would say once or twice a week, your choice. So you can call about once a week, because this needs to be reviewed over and over and over again. That the whole thing about human minds is that it works upon repetition. Mm-hmm. Everything needs to be repeated over and over again. In fact, you got yourself into the state that you're in now because you were repeating unwholesome thoughts over and over again your whole life. You have literally been talking yourself into feeling bad. Now is the time to talk yourself into feeling good if you can remember. So we need to repeat this over and over again to help you remember so that you can put your thoughts into the place where you can make yourself feel really good. All right. So we'll see you later then.
Should I schedule a time or just come whenever I want to?
No, I do not schedule. Okay. No schedules allowed. If you make an appointment and don't keep it, you'll feel bad. Mm-hmm. If you make an appointment, then you'll think about the appointment. Mm-hmm. In the sense of I ought to go call him, and then you don't. Mm-hmm. If you make an appointment, then what am I going to do with it? I've got all of these appointments. I have to keep track of all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. No, it's better just to call.
Okay.
If you text, then it's likely that it won't be seen for hours
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not always at the computer. But if you call, then the ringing can be heard. And normally I don't answer a call. I don't go rush over to the computer. So hang around if you call and I don't answer, and within a few minutes I'll get back with you.
Cool.
Just like we have this time. I should call in 10 minutes. Okay, that's basically what will happen. So call when you're ready to call.
Mm-hmm.
Call when you need it the most. Call me when you feel really good, and call me when you feel really bad, and call me someplace in between.
The beginning, the middle, the end.
All right, we'll see you.
So, yeah.